Now this video is about the work specifications. As I said, the case specifications contains either a summary of contracts in individual trade contracts or a summary of works when it's a main contract. It'll contain this summary of the different contracts or works in the summary here in the case specifications. That summary is over here, but if we look at the work specifications for the project, each of these items mentioned in the summary in the case specifications is given a work specification. In other words, each contractor must have his own work specifications, and the work specifications are for pricing the project. This is very important. Anything you forget in the work specifications will not be priced. And therefore, if you need it done on the building site, it'll cost you extra. The contractor will ask for extra money. If we go into detail with the work specifications, you can see there is a summary of building components. So each work specification has a summary of building components. For example, this could be the masonry works here, and there's a component called the roof surface, in other words the pan tiles on the roof, the brickwork repairs, the masonry works on the extension, the repairs of internal brickwork, etc., etc. So each item that this masonry contractor has to do is listed over here, and each of these will correspond to a building component specification later on. The building component specification is part of the work specification. It is chapter 4 in the work specification. So each building component is specified in chapter 4 of the work specification. And this is what comes over in the next specifications, the work specifications. So if we look at the build-up of the work specifications, if we look at from section, at the beginning here, section 2, all the way down to section 3, these are all the things that need to be priced. In other words, we have first of all the summary here of the building components that need to be priced. Then we have to price any design work that the contractor has to do. Then we have to price any building site work the contractor has to do. By that I mean things he has to supply to the building site, like cabins, containers, skips for refuse, anything else that he has to produce for the building site, any safety things he has to do on the building site. For example, this contractor might be asked to put up a safety barrier around shafts, lift shafts, for example, and maintain them throughout the contract. Then that has to be mentioned here, otherwise he will not do it. Because that work costs money. If the contractor needs to protect the surrounding environment in some way by putting up a barrier, for example, a fence around the building site, then it'll be mentioned here too. Well, mostly this is about putting up barriers that prevent the environment from being spoiled by noise or by vibration and so on. The fence for the building site would come in under the building site here under section 2.4. The quality assurance of of his work, this contractor's work, must be mentioned here. For example, the tender control plan will be mentioned here. If the contractor has to take part in meetings and so on, and usually contractors have to do that, the frequency of the meetings are mentioned here, so that he can set aside people to do that, because that's going to cost him money. If the contractor needs to provide samples, for example, if he needs to provide brickwork samples, or he needs to put up a wall in 1-to-1, let's say a 5 square meter wall, and maybe take it down later on after the inspection has looked at it, then he has to be mentioned here. So everything in section 2 all the way up to 2.9 is about the things he has to do on site, in other words, the things he has to price. Whereas section 3 here is about references. So this first section is about what he has to do and what he has to price. And section 3 is about how he has to do it. In other words, all the norms that are valid for this particular contract must be mentioned here under references. And all the materials and products, if they have to come from a specific supplier, for example, a supplier that's connected to some sort of quality assurance system, it has to be mentioned here. And demands about the execution of the work, is it going to be done in accordance with best practice and so on, it has to be mentioned here. The tender control plan is put in here, and relationships to other work and the work environment, all those requirements are put in here. So section 3 is about how to do the work, the quality of the work, and the norms under which this work is regulated. Section 4, the last section, is about the actual building component specifications. In other words, each of the items that was mentioned here in the summary of building components will be given a building components specification. As I mentioned, this is only a kind of introduction to the build-up of the work specifications. The actual work specifications you can find on the link, and I will just go through them very quickly. So starting in section 2, well, obviously the first page looks like this, where you have the work specifications here, and then you have a table of contents, etc., which goes through the sections I've just mentioned. Section 2 is where you price stuff, section 3 is the references to norms and so on, and section 4 is the building component specifications for each of the items mentioned in the building components here under section 2.2. But if we look at it in detail, here we have the things you have to consider, and I've written it in red here. So for example, here under 2.2, you make the summary of building components that exist in this particular work specifications. And in the next one, he says the following components are going to be delivered by the employer or another contractor, and you have to mount it as part of this works. So you list the things that the employer, or in other words the client, or the other contractors will give you, and which you have to mount as part of this contract. And then there's a section here where you have to mention the stuff that other contractors will mount while you're doing your work. In this section here, you have a design and detail design. Does the contractor have to do any design as part of his work here? If you go to detail design 2, then the answer here is nothing. So you write none. The building site. What should the contractor supply on this building site? Portable cabins, fences, etc. You name them here after each other. Health and safety. What does this guy have to do on the site? What does this contractor have to do on the site with regard to health and safety? Does he have to provide a barrier in front of lift shafts, and when does he have to maintain them, and so on? You mention it here. It says see also the building case specifications. That does not mean that you can write here see case specifications. You shouldn't make references to the case specifications here. This is just a reference to you to look at the case specifications, because you've written that first, and you must make sure that anything written here is in accordance with what's written in the case specifications. But do not make references, see case specifications here, as a pricing item for health and safety, or anything else for that matter. So here, surrounding environment. What does this contractor have to provide to prevent noise and vibration and so on for the surrounding environment? What quality assurance does this contractor have to provide here? And so on and so forth. Operation and maintenance. Does this contractor have to provide any operation and maintenance for the items he's building into the project? For example, how do they maintain the surface of tiles in the bathroom and in the kitchen and so on? When does he have to participate in planning and scheduling? What samples does he have to produce? Does he have to produce a 5 square meter area of brickwork so that the client can look at it and approve it before he goes on with his work? And does he need to demolish it afterwards, and so on? So fill in all these areas, and this has to do with pricing all the way up to 2.9. But when it comes to 3, you have to write the references In other words, the norms and standards for this particular works. If you don't know the norms and standards, talk to your structural teacher. Maybe he can help you with those references. And directions and instructions with regard to, for example, bonding patterns or and so on. You're kind of trying to set a benchmark out here. Maybe you'll make references to existing journals or brochures regarding the bonding pattern in, for example, brickwork and so on. And if we go on further with the materials and products, do the materials and products for this particular contract have to come from approved manufacturers, for example, something to do with certified Euro or Danish quality assurance systems and so on. In this section here about tender control plan, you put in the tender control plan for the particular item each person in the group is working with. Each person in the group must produce a work specification, and the tender control plan must be valid for that particular part of the work he's doing or she's doing in detail design 2. So that you don't have to do a tender control plan for all the components in this contract, just the component you're working with in detail design 2. Because if you can do one, you can do them all. In a real life project, obviously, you'll have to do a tender control plan for all the works listed in the summary of works in this work specification. And if you don't know anything about the tender control plan, on the Prezi there is some theory about the tender control plan, which splits the tender control plan into delivery control, mounting control, and production control or process control. So look at that if you don't know anything about it. And then finally, we look at the building component specifications, which is the subject of the next video. But this part 4, the building component specification, you should only do for your particular work in detail design 2, and section 4 is part of the work specifications. And that ends this video.